The battlefield was a storm of chaos. Smoke curled into the sky like black serpents, and the sharp whistle of bullets cut through the air, ripping apart everything in their path. Somewhere nearby, a young soldier cried out, his voice barely audible over the roar of artillery. Another fell silently, his eyes wide with fear, staring at the heavens as if pleading for someone, anyone, to save him. And then there was Susan Adams, just 22, running straight into that storm. She wasn't trained to fight like a soldier. She wasn't armed with anything more than courage and an unbreakable sense of duty. But courage, she knew, could be as lethal as a rifle when wielded at the right moment. Her boots sank into the mud with each desperate step, and the wind from explosions whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't falter. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to stop, to hide, to survive. Yet every life around her weighed heavier than fear. She had seen enough to know what hesitation cost: death, pain, and silence. There were young men pinned down by shrapnel, screaming in agony, begging for help that might never come. And Susan ran toward them. She ran as though her own heartbeat was a drum calling the fallen to rise. A shell exploded mere feet away, hurling dirt and debris into the air. She stumbled but didn't fall. Her hands were already reaching for the first wounded soldier she saw, a young man no older than her brother back home in Indiana. His uniform was torn, blood soaking through, his breathing shallow and ragged. Without a second thought, she lifted him, feeling the strain in her arms, the weight of responsibility crushing her chest. Every second mattered. Every second could mean life or death. Around her, the world was chaos incarnate. Smoke burned her lungs, and the ground trembled with the force of falling shells. Yet she moved with a rhythm, a determination that seemed almost unnatural. Soldiers later described her as moving through the hail of bullets as if protected by some invisible force, guided by sheer willpower. She carried one soldier to safety, laid him gently behind the line, and turned immediately to reach another. There was no hesitation, no thought for herself. Each life she saved became a mantra: move, lift, run, survive. Time stretched in those moments, seconds feeling like hours. The cries of the injured mixed with the relentless gunfire into a horrifying symphony, and Susan kept moving, her face streaked with mud and sweat, yet set in a calm determination. She lifted another young man, then another, each body a reminder of the horrors around her, yet each life a spark of hope she refused to extinguish. The field was a river of chaos, bullets cutting through the air like razor-sharp fish, but she was the storm that answered it, fearless, unrelenting. Every soldier she carried whispered thanks, some through gasps of pain, others with silent, grateful tears. And she kept running, adrenaline propelling her beyond exhaustion, beyond fear. Her mind was clear, focused, a single thought echoing louder than the roar around her: I cannot fail them. Even when the artillery barrage intensified, when shells began to fall closer and closer, she did not stop. She moved like a force of nature, lifting, running, protecting. Around her, comrades fell, screaming, crying, and she pressed on. The fear in their eyes mirrored the terror in hers, yet she refused to let it consume her. Each time she set down a soldier safely, she felt a moment of relief, only to rush into the next cluster of wounded. Each step a testament to human resilience. Around her, the world was chaos incarnate. Smoke burned her lungs, and the ground trembled with the force of falling shells. Yet she moved with a rhythm, a determination that seemed almost unnatural. Soldiers later described her as moving through the hail of bullets as if protected by some invisible force, guided by sheer willpower. She carried one soldier to safety, laid him gently behind the line, and turned immediately to reach another. There was no hesitation, no thought for herself. Each life she saved became a mantra: move, lift, run, survive. Time stretched in those moments, seconds feeling like hours. The cries of the injured mixed with the relentless gunfire into a horrifying symphony, and Susan kept moving, her face streaked with mud and sweat, yet set in a calm determination. She lifted another young man, then another. Each body a reminder of the horrors around her, yet each life a spark of hope she refused to extinguish. The field was a river of chaos, bullets cutting through the air like razor-sharp fish, but she was the storm that answered it, fearless, unrelenting. Every soldier she carried whispered thanks, some through gasps of pain, others with silent, grateful tears. And she kept running, adrenaline propelling her beyond exhaustion, beyond fear. Her mind was clear, focused, a single thought echoing louder than the roar around her. I cannot fail them. Even when the artillery barrage intensified, when shells began to fall closer and closer, she did not stop. She moved like a force of nature, lifting, running, protecting. Around her, comrades fell, screaming, crying, and she pressed on. The fear in their eyes mirrored the terror in hers, yet she refused to let it consume her. Each time she set down a soldier safely, she felt a moment of relief, only to rush into the next cluster of wounded. Each step a testament to human resilience. By the time the dust settled, by the time the battlefield seemed to breathe for a moment of silence, Susan was exhausted, soaked in mud and blood, yet alive. She had carried more lives than anyone could count. And in the eyes of those young soldiers, she was more than a nurse, more than a rescuer. She had walked into death and turned it into hope, teaching the world that bravery was not in guns or armor, it was in the willingness to risk everything for others. The memory of that day would haunt her, yes, but it would also define her. In letters written years later, soldiers recalled the young nurse who ran through fire and gunfire, lifting them from the brink of death with nothing but strength, courage, and a heart too big for fear. Susan Addams was a hero not for accolades, not for medals, but for living proof that even in the darkest hours of war, humanity could shine brighter than any explosion. The mud clung to Susan's boots as she raced across the battlefield, each step a defiance against the chaos surrounding her. Shells exploded with terrifying regularity, sending shards of earth and metal into the air like deadly rain. The cries of the wounded seemed endless, echoing across the fields, a symphony of pain and desperation. But Susan didn't slow down. Each life she saw mattered more than her own safety. Every young man pinned under fire, every soldier trembling with fear, was a story she refused to let end. A sudden scream tore through the smoke, closer this time. Susan turned her head, spotting a soldier lying face down, a crimson stain spreading across his uniform. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted, feeling the bullets whistle past, close enough to graze her shoulders, hot air from the ricochets brushing against her face. The ground seemed to shake beneath her, but she ran as if propelled by something larger than herself, something that would not let fear dictate her actions. She reached him and crouched, examining his wounds with rapid precision. His eyes were wide, filled with terror, and he tried to speak, but could only gasp. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice barely rose above the gunfire. She lifted him carefully, balancing his weight against her own exhaustion. Each step was a struggle, every muscle screaming, yet she refused to falter. She had learned in those first moments of chaos that hesitation was death, that bravery demanded movement, not contemplation. Nearby, a medic was pinned behind a crumbling wall, unable to reach his own patient. Susan glanced at him for a brief second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then she turned back, sprinting across the field, her figure moving like a ghost among the carnage. She carried the wounded soldier to the safety of a shallow trench, laying him down gently as if he were the most fragile object in the world. He looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude, whispering a shaky, "Thank you," before collapsing into exhaustion. But there was no time to rest. A fresh wave of gunfire erupted from the tree line, cutting down anyone who lingered too long. Susan glanced around, spotting another cluster of wounded soldiers, some barely conscious, others screaming for help. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, her arms trembling, but she ran toward them anyway. Bullets tore through the air around her, kicking up dirt at her feet, yet she moved with a rhythm born of necessity and sheer determination. Each step was measured, every movement precise, a dance with danger that demanded absolute focus. One young soldier, pinned under a fallen beam, reached out to her with bloodied hands. Susan dropped to her knees, bracing herself, and lifted him with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Another shell landed nearby, shaking the earth violently. Dust filled the air, stinging her eyes, but she pressed on, refusing to let panic claim her. Every life she saved became a fuel, a reason to keep moving when her own body begged her to stop. As she ran, she glimpsed a fleeting shadow of a commanding officer, waving frantically for medics to advance. Susan locked eyes with him for a split second, a silent promise passing between them. Then she was off again, weaving between explosions and debris, carrying another wounded soldier, then another, her figure almost supernatural against the backdrop of fire and smoke. Soldiers later said they had never seen anyone move like that, a woman defying death itself, with nothing but courage and unwavering resolve. The adrenaline coursing through her veins kept exhaustion at bay, but every now and then a painful thought pierced through. What if she couldn't save them all? What if one slip, one misstep could cost a life? But even that fear could not halt her. She had learned that in war, fear was a luxury. Action was survival, not just for herself, but for everyone she carried, everyone who depended on her resolve. Hours seemed to blur together. The field became a chaotic mosaic of mud, blood, and smoke, yet Susan moved with purpose, each rescue blending into the next. Soldiers whispered her name in disbelief and reverence. Susan Adams, the nurse who ran through fire, who carried hope on her shoulders, who turned fear into action. And though her body ached, though her lungs burned and her hands trembled, she pressed on, driven by a force that could not be named, only felt, a relentless, unstoppable commitment to life. As night began to fall, painting the sky with streaks of blood red and smoky gray, Susan finally paused for a moment, leaning against a wall for balance. The battlefield was still alive with echoes of battle, but the soldiers she had saved were alive, breathing, and holding on. She allowed herself a single fleeting breath, knowing that tomorrow the fight would continue, but she would face it, as she had today, fearless and unyielding. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The real test of courage had just begun, and Susan Adams would rise to meet it, one life at a time. The night was settling over the battlefield, but the chaos showed no signs of slowing. The distant thunder of artillery had become a relentless heartbeat, shaking the earth beneath Susan's feet. Mud clung to her uniform like a second skin, her hands raw and trembling, but still she moved forward. She had already carried more soldiers than she could count, yet every cry for help pulled her deeper into the storm. The thought of leaving even one behind was unthinkable. She had crossed the line between fear and duty, and there was no turning back. Ahead, a soldier's faint moan pierced through the smoke. Susan's eyes locked onto him, barely visible, pinned under debris, blood seeping into the dirt. Bullets zipped past her like angry hornets, the ricochet from a nearby shell kicking dirt into her face, stinging her eyes. She swallowed the fear rising in her chest, forcing it down with a single thought: he will live if I get to him. She sprinted, weaving through fallen trees, craters, and bodies. Her boots sank into the mud with every step, yet she pushed forward, every muscle burning with effort. She reached him, crouched low, and quickly assessed the wound. His breathing was shallow, panic clear in his wide eyes. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice steady even as adrenaline coursed through her veins. She hoisted him onto her shoulders, feeling the strain in her arms and back, but refusing to falter. The ground trembled again as a nearby shell exploded, hurling mud and shrapnel into the air. She shielded the soldier instinctively, moving with precision born of sheer necessity. Each step was a battle, each breath a defiance against the chaos around her. Suddenly, another wave of gunfire erupted from the tree line. Bullets tore through the air, some striking the earth mere inches from her. She froze for the briefest moment, calculating, and then ran. Every movement was deliberate, a dance with death, carrying the soldier through the deadly orchestra surrounding them. He clung to her tightly, trusting completely, while she kept her eyes sharp for any threat. The world had become a blur of smoke, mud, and screams, yet in that chaos, she was laser-focused. Another soldier caught her eye, pinned under a broken cart, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Susan's heart raced, but she did not hesitate. She set down the first man carefully behind a low mound, then turned back into the fray. She braced herself, bent low, and lifted the second soldier with all her remaining strength. Her arms trembled under the weight, mud and blood coating her uniform, but she refused to let him fall. The sound of explosions was deafening, yet she moved forward, propelled by something beyond exhaustion, an unshakable determination to save lives. Each step was a test. She felt the heat of a nearby blast, dirt and debris raining over her like hail. She stumbled, almost losing her balance, but she caught herself, refusing to collapse. Around her, soldiers fell, some screaming, some silent, yet she pressed on, each rescue building a rhythm of survival. The adrenaline kept her moving, masking the fatigue and fear that gnawed at her body. Her mind focused only on the next life, the next rescue, the next heartbeat she could protect. Time became meaningless. The sky darkened further, smoke curling like black ribbons around explosions, but Susan did not stop. Another wave of soldiers cried for help, trapped in a small crater near the center of the battlefield. She ran toward them, hoisting one after another, moving with precision and courage that seemed almost superhuman. Witnesses later recalled seeing her silhouette, mud-smeared and blood-streaked, darting through gunfire as if protected by some invisible shield. She was not invincible, but her determination made her feel unstoppable. And yet, as she lifted the last soldier from that small crater, a massive explosion erupted just yards away. The ground shook violently, and Susan was thrown off balance, the soldier slipping from her grasp. She hit the earth hard, her ears ringing, vision blurred. The world seemed to spin around her as dust and smoke consumed everything. Her body ached in every joint, her muscles screaming in pain, yet she forced herself upright. She crawled, staggering toward the soldiers she had saved moments before, ensuring they were safe. By the time she finally paused, the battlefield had become eerily quiet, a brief reprieve amid the storm. Yet Susan knew this was temporary. Tomorrow, the battle would continue, and she would continue with it, carrying lives, hope, and courage into the fire again. The night had tested her, almost breaking her body, but not her spirit. Susan Addams had faced death and chaos head-on, leaving an indelible mark on every life she touched. And somewhere, deep in her chest, a quiet, unyielding voice whispered, "This is only the beginning." The sky was dark now, smoke mingling with the fading light of dusk, yet the battlefield refused to rest. Each crater, each fallen tree, each blood-stained uniform told a story of chaos and fear. Susan Addams' boots squelched in the mud as she ran again, the adrenaline of the day still surging through her veins. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, but she could not stop. There were more soldiers, more lives depending on her courage, and every heartbeat mattered. A sudden scream ripped through the night, sharper, more desperate than before. Susan's head snapped toward it. A young soldier was pinned beneath a broken supply cart, his leg twisted in a way that made her stomach churn. Bullets ricocheted dangerously close, kicking dirt into her face. Yet she ran without hesitation, her uniform ripped and smeared with mud, her hands trembling, gripping tightly. She reached him, crouching low to assess the wound. His breathing was shallow, each gasp sounding like a knife through the chaos around them. "I've got you," she said, her voice calm despite the storm raging around her. Lifting him required every ounce of strength she had left. Mud clung to her boots, her muscles screamed, but fear had no place in her mind. She moved as though guided by an unseen force, each step a precise calculation between safety and survival. Around her, explosions flared, and the smell of gunpowder stung her eyes. She forced herself forward, carrying him to a safer area behind a mound of earth, placing him gently down. But there was no time to rest. Another volley of bullets cut through the air, forcing her to pivot, scan, and move again. Another soldier was screaming for help, pinned under debris that threatened to crush him. Susan dropped down, bracing herself, and lifted him as well. Each rescue seemed impossible, each step heavier than the last, yet she refused to falter. Her focus sharpened with each passing second, her mind locking on to the next life she could save. A shell exploded nearby, throwing her off balance, the force nearly knocking her to the ground. She stumbled, pain lancing through her body, but she grabbed the soldier and steadied herself. Every second was a dance with death. Every move could be the one that ended it all. And yet she pressed on, driven by determination and an unshakable sense of responsibility. Soldiers later would whisper about the young nurse who ran through fire and death without hesitation, whose courage seemed almost supernatural. As she carried one soldier after another, she noticed the enemy lines shifting closer, a surge of panic running through her body. But she pushed it aside. There was no room for fear, no time for doubt. Every life she saved was a victory in itself, a small light against the darkness around them. She moved with speed and precision, weaving through smoke and debris, bullets cutting dangerously close, adrenaline and fear merging into a single force propelling her forward. Finally, she reached a small trench where the wounded could find temporary safety. She set down the last soldier she carried and immediately turned back to find more. Exhaustion clawed at her, her legs burning, her back screaming in protest, but she could not stop. The cries of those trapped in the open drew her forward again, each one a call she could not ignore. Her determination burned brighter than the explosions around her. Then, from the tree line, a sudden flare of gunfire erupted. Susan froze for a heartbeat, assessing the danger. A soldier yelled, warning her of a sniper in the trees. The sound of bullets cracking overhead was terrifying, but she knew hesitation meant death, not just for her, but for those she had not yet reached. Without a second thought, she ran again, ducking, dodging, lifting, and sprinting with an almost superhuman determination. By the time she paused, the battlefield was a blur of smoke, mud, and blood. Her uniform was shredded, her hands raw, her body screaming for relief. But Susan Adams had once again carried life out of death. The soldiers she had saved were breathing, groaning, alive. But the war was far from over. And in the quiet moment before the next barrage, she realized something chilling. The night would bring new dangers, and she would have to face them all, one life at a time. This was only the beginning. The battlefield had grown eerily quiet for a moment, but Susan knew better than to trust the calm. Somewhere in the distance, gunfire crackled sporadically, and the air was thick with smoke and dust. Her boots were caked in mud, her uniform soaked with sweat and blood. Yet she moved forward again, scanning the battlefield with eyes sharp and focused. Each soldier lying injured was a life she refused to abandon, a story that could not end in silence. She spotted a young man struggling to crawl toward a fallen tree, his uniform torn, his arm bent at a dangerous angle. Without hesitation, Susan sprinted toward him, bullets whizzing past, kicking up clouds of dirt at her feet. She crouched low, assessing the injury, and whispered reassuringly, "You're going to make it. I won't let you die here." Every word was an anchor, every gesture a promise. She lifted him carefully, feeling the strain in her arms, mud sticking to her skin, muscles trembling, but she refused to falter. The sound of artillery rumbled again, shaking the ground beneath her. She glanced around, seeing another group of soldiers trapped under the remnants of a collapsed barricade. She ran toward them, her mind a single focus on survival and courage. Each movement was deliberate, precise, a careful dance between life and death. She reached one young man, hoisted him over her shoulder, and sprinted to a shallow trench where he could catch his breath. There was no time to rest, no time to process her own exhaustion. The battlefield demanded constant motion, constant vigilance, constant bravery. Another wave of gunfire erupted from a nearby hill. Susan ducked instinctively, feeling the rush of wind as bullets tore through the air mere inches from her. She pressed forward, ignoring the searing pain in her legs, ignoring the fatigue that threatened to slow her down. Each soldier she rescued became a fuel, a reason to keep moving, a reminder that fear could not dictate action. She lifted another wounded soldier, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear, and carried him to safety, mud and blood coating her uniform. As she paused briefly behind a mound, catching her breath just enough to see the chaos around her, she noticed the eyes of those she had saved. Gratitude, hope, and disbelief shone in their gazes. They whispered her name softly, Susan Adams, the young nurse who ran through hell to bring them back to life. Her heart clenched with a mixture of pride and humility. She was only doing what she knew she must, yet in their eyes she was something extraordinary, almost otherworldly. Suddenly, a flare shot into the sky from the enemy lines, illuminating the battlefield in a harsh white light. Susan's head snapped up, recognizing the signal of an impending attack. Panic could have taken hold, but she shoved it aside. There were still soldiers trapped in the open, and they needed her. She sprinted again, her movements fluid and determined, weaving between debris and mud, ignoring the burning ache in her muscles, ignoring the fear that tried to creep in. She lifted another wounded soldier, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear, and carried him to safety, mud and blood coating her uniform. As she paused briefly behind a mound, catching her breath just enough to see the chaos around her, she noticed the eyes of those she had saved. Gratitude, hope, and disbelief shone in their gazes. They whispered her name softly, Susan Adams, the young nurse who ran through hell to bring them back to life. Her heart clenched with a mixture of pride and humility. She was only doing what she knew she must, yet in their eyes she was something extraordinary, almost otherworldly. Suddenly, a flare shot into the sky from the enemy lines, illuminating the battlefield in a harsh white light. Susan's head snapped up, recognizing the signal of an impending attack. Panic could have taken hold, but she shoved it aside. There were still soldiers trapped in the open, and they needed her. She sprinted again, her movements fluid and determined, weaving between debris and mud, ignoring the burning ache in her muscles, ignoring the fear that tried to creep in. She reached a soldier pinned beneath a fallen crate, his face pale and drawn. "I've got you," she whispered, hoisting him effortlessly despite the weight and his terrified thrashing. Bullets cracked overhead, the world vibrating with the sound of explosions and screaming. Yet she moved with unshakable resolve. She carried him to the relative safety of the trench, placing him gently, whispering words of comfort as if that alone could protect him from the horrors they had faced. By the time Susan took a brief pause, the battlefield had become a mosaic of smoke, mud, and blood. Each life she had touched was a testament to courage, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, humanity could shine. Her body screamed in protest, exhaustion pressing down like a weight she could not shake. Yet she knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she would face them as she had today. Unyielding, relentless, brave. And somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet, unwavering thought persisted. I will not stop. I cannot stop. Every life matters. The battlefield was a living nightmare, the air thick with smoke, mud, and the acrid scent of gunpowder. Each step Susan Adams took felt like a defiance against death itself. Her uniform was torn, her hands raw, her body trembling with exhaustion, yet she moved forward again. The cries of the wounded were a relentless drum in her ears, each one pulling her deeper into the chaos. Fear tried to creep in, but she shoved it aside. There was no room for hesitation, not when lives depended on her courage. A sudden explosion rocked the field, sending shards of wood and earth flying in all directions. Susan ducked instinctively, feeling the blast knock the wind out of her lungs, but she pushed forward without pause. Her eyes locked on a soldier pinned beneath a fallen tree, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Bullets tore through the air around her, some striking the ground mere inches away. Yet she sprinted, her heart hammering, lifting him onto her shoulders with a strength born of desperation and determination. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she would not falter. She ran toward a shallow trench, weaving through debris and mud, her breath ragged but steady. Another soldier called out from nearby, trapped under broken wooden beams, his voice breaking with panic. Susan glanced at him, a flicker of fear sparking in her chest, but she ignored it. Each life mattered more than her own safety. She dove toward him, bracing herself, and lifted him with all her strength. Bullets ricocheted dangerously close, kicking up mud and dirt, yet she kept moving, an unstoppable force in a field of chaos. The explosions around her were relentless, the ground shaking with each detonation. Smoke burned her eyes, but she blinked through it, refusing to let the world blur into darkness. Another wave of soldiers was trapped in a crater, screaming for help. Susan ran toward them, her body screaming for relief, but her mind focused solely on the lives she could save. She lifted one after another, placing them in a safer area behind a mound of earth. The gratitude in their eyes was fleeting, yet it fueled her, giving her strength she didn't know she had left. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Enemy snipers. Bullets zipped past her, some striking dangerously close. Susan froze for a heartbeat, calculating, then ran, each movement deliberate, each step a dance with death. She reached a soldier pinned under a shattered cart, hoisting him over her shoulder. Another explosion rocked the field, throwing debris at her feet. She stumbled, almost losing her balance, but she pressed on, refusing to let go of the life she carried. Time seemed to stretch and warp as she moved through the battlefield. The sky darkened further, smoke mingling with the setting sun, painting everything in blood red and gray. She lifted another soldier, then another, each step a testament to human resilience. Around her, chaos reigned, yet she moved with precision, almost supernatural in her determination. Witnesses later described her as moving through fire and bullets as if protected by an unseen shield, a force of nature defying death itself. Her body was on the edge of collapse. Every muscle screamed, her lungs burned, and exhaustion gnawed at her bones. But she could not stop. Another soldier cried for help, trapped under debris near the center of the battlefield. Susan glanced around, noting the incoming artillery barrage, the danger that surrounded her. She ran, hoisting him carefully, sweat and blood mingling on her skin, ignoring the searing pain. Each life she saved became a mantra, a rhythm that pushed her forward despite the odds. Then a massive explosion erupted just yards away, throwing her off balance. She hit the ground hard, the soldier she carried slipping from her grasp. Dust and smoke consumed everything. Her ears rang, vision blurred, and the ground shook beneath her. She struggled to rise, coughing, shaking, and then realized a chilling fact. The battlefield was collapsing around her, and the next move could decide life or death, for her and for those she had not yet reached. Somewhere in the darkness, she whispered a single thought, fierce and unyielding. I will not fail them. The world around her was still shaking when Susan finally forced herself to stand. The dust thinned just enough for her to see the blinking, confused eyes of the soldier she had dropped in the blast. She grabbed his arm, hauled him upright, and pulled him toward safety, each step a fight against the quivering earth beneath them. Her breath was ragged, her legs weak, but her resolve sharp as ever. She dragged him into a narrow ditch, just as another explosion tore through the ground she had stood on seconds before. For a moment she just knelt there, her body trembling violently, hands shaking from shock and exhaustion. She wanted to collapse. She wanted to breathe. But she heard another sound, a distant, panicked shout for help, and it pulled her back into motion like a hook through her chest. She wiped the dirt from her eyes, braced her knees, and forced herself upright. The battlefield no longer felt like earth. It felt alive, roaring, screaming, daring her to keep going. And she did. Minutes later, she reached the field hospital, a collection of tents barely standing under the pressure of incoming wounded. Inside, the air felt almost unreal compared to the battlefield. Warm, bright lanterns, the sharp sting of antiseptic, the metallic smell of blood. The cries here were different, softer, more desperate. Doctors and nurses rushed everywhere, calling orders, dragging supplies, stitching wounds, trying to stop lives from slipping through their fingers. Susan staggered into the tent with two soldiers leaning heavily on her shoulders, both half-conscious, both bleeding. A doctor looked up, eyes wide from shock. "You brought them out? From that area? That area is burning!" Susan didn't respond. She simply laid them gently on the cots and turned to walk back out. But a nurse grabbed her arm. "Sit! You need to sit! You're bleeding!" Susan glanced down as if noticing her own injuries for the first time. Torn skin, deep cuts, bruises blooming across her body. She didn't flinch. "I can't stop. There are more out there," she whispered. The nurse's eyes softened, not with pity, but with a kind of awe. "No one else is going back right now. You're the only one who keeps coming." But Susan had already turned away. She pushed through the tent flap and stepped back into the roar of the battlefield. The world felt harsher now, the smoke heavier, the screams sharper, but she didn't slow down. She ran to a collapsed jeep where two medics were pinned beneath twisted metal. The vehicle groaned ominously, threatening to cave in completely. Susan planted her feet, wrapped both hands around the metal frame, and pulled. Her muscles cried out, her back screamed, her vision blurred, but she did not let go. Inch by inch, she freed the first medic, then the second. They stared at her like they were looking at a miracle. How are you? "No time," she panted. "Move!" She helped them limp toward the hospital, shielding them with her own body as bullets cut the air around them. Every step felt like lifting a mountain, but she pressed forward. She could see the tent ahead, the faint glow of lanterns like a distant promise of safety. Inside, chaos exploded again. Susan rushed to a table to help hold down a soldier as a doctor removed shrapnel from his abdomen. She grabbed bandages, applied pressure to wounds, steadied trembling hands, and whispered to soldiers who were fading in and out of consciousness. Some cried, some shook uncontrollably, some clutched her wrist and begged her not to leave them. And through it all, Susan didn't crumble. She became still, focused, precise. Her movements smooth despite the pain, her voice calm despite the terror. The field hospital began to feel different around her, less frantic, more controlled, as though her presence alone steadied the chaos. One young soldier with dirt smeared across his face and fear in his eyes looked at her and whispered, "Ma'am, I thought I was gone out there, but you came for me." She paused, her hand resting on his shoulder. "No one gets left behind," she said softly. "Not while I'm standing." And then another explosion shook the ground louder and closer than any before. The lantern swayed. Instruments rattled. Dust rained down from the tent ceiling. Everyone froze. Then the shouting began. "Incoming rounds. Direct hit expected. Everyone brace!" Susan turned toward the entrance. She could feel the danger approaching like a wave about to crash. The doctors and nurses shielded their patients. Panic rippled through the tent. But Susan didn't flinch. She stepped forward, ready to run toward the blast. Because out there, right now, there were still soldiers alive, still screaming, still waiting. And she would not let them die. The ground rumbled violently, and everything around her shook as she sprinted straight into the darkness again. The night had fully swallowed the battlefield now, turning everything into shifting shadows and flashes of fire. As Susan sprinted into the darkness again, the cold wind slapped against her face, carrying with it the distant rumble of tanks, the thunder of artillery, and the trembling cries of men trying to stay alive. Her boots sank into the mud with every step, but she kept moving, faster, harder, her breath sharp in her chest. She didn't notice how much blood she'd lost. She didn't notice the bruises crawling across her ribs or the sting of torn skin along her arms. Her mind had narrowed into a single burning purpose: find whoever was still out there. A flare shot up into the sky, casting the battlefield in a harsh white glow. That moment of brightness revealed it all. Men trapped between burning vehicles, medics struggling under sniper fire, debris scattered like bones across the earth. And there, near a shattered artillery cart, a soldier lay motionless, one arm raised weakly in the air, as if begging the heavens not to forget him. Susan didn't hesitate. She ran straight toward him, dodging falling metal and sliding through thick mud. A bullet struck the ground so close to her boot that mud splashed against her legs, but she didn't slow even for a heartbeat. She slid to her knees beside the soldier, rolling him gently onto his back. His face was pale, blood matting his hair, breath shallow. "You're okay. I've got you, she whispered, even though she wasn't sure. The soldier blinked, tears mixing with the dirt on his face. I thought I was going to die alone." Susan shoved her shoulder under his arm and lifted him with a strength that shouldn't have been possible anymore. "Not tonight," she said, "not while I'm out here." As she carried him, enemy fire suddenly intensified, lighting up the battlefield with flashes of orange and white. She ducked behind a rusted metal barrier, heart pounding, shielding the soldier with her own body. Bullets ricocheted around them like angry wasps. "You need to go," the soldier cried. "You'll get hit." Susan shook her head. "I told you, nobody gets left." The fire slowed just enough for her to push forward again. She staggered with him toward the small trench line where a few exhausted medics were waiting. The moment she handed him over, her knees almost buckled. A medic grabbed her arm. "You've been out there for hours. Sit down before you collapse." But she pulled away. "There are more." The medic stared at her, eyes wide, voice trembling. "You've saved more men tonight than an entire unit. How are you still walking?" Susan didn't answer, because she didn't know. All she felt was the burning urgency in her chest, the weight of lives still waiting in the darkness. She turned again toward the smoke, the screams, the fire. And as she did, she felt something strange happening around her. People began watching her, really watching her. Medics, nurses, even wounded soldiers propped up on stretchers stared as she moved, their eyes following her like she was something unreal. Some whispered her name like a prayer. "Susan's going back out." Again? How does she do it? She's not human. She's something else. But she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the patch of ground near the collapsed buildings where she heard faint cries earlier. She remembered the tremble in those voices, the way they sounded more like boys than soldiers. She forced her legs to keep moving, even though every nerve in her body screamed for rest. She pushed forward, deeper into the ruins. The night grew colder, the smoke thicker. Flames licked at broken walls, threatening to collapse. Somewhere ahead, she heard coughing, a weak, desperate sound. She climbed over broken beams and fallen bricks, her hands torn and bleeding, her breath sharp. Finally, she found them. 2 young soldiers, trapped under rubble, their faces streaked with ash, eyes wide with terror. "We didn't think anyone would come," one whispered. Susan knelt, brushing dirt from their faces. "I'm here now. You're not dying in this place, not tonight." She dug with her hands, pulling away heavy stones, shifting wooden beams, ignoring the debris cutting into her skin. Piece by piece, inch by inch, she freed them both. Then she helped them stand, one arm around each, guiding them slowly toward the safer paths. Behind them, the ruins creaked ominously. The structure was collapsing. "Hurry," she whispered. "Lean on me. Lean." But the ground beneath her vibrated. A deep, heavy rumble shook the air. The wall behind them buckled, crumbling inward. Susan shoved both soldiers forward, just in time for a massive slab of stone to crash down behind her. dust exploding into the air. The soldiers turned back. "Susan, are you hurt?" She shook off the dust, breath trembling. "I'm fine. Keep moving." But when she took a step, her vision swayed. The world warped. The smoke blurred. Her knees gave a warning tremble. She steadied herself against a broken beam, willing her body to hold. She couldn't stop now. Not here. Not when so many needed her. But as she straightened, her eyes widened, because deeper in the ruins, she spotted something she wasn't prepared for. A figure, barely moving, half buried under burning debris. Someone she hadn't seen before, someone she hadn't saved yet, and the entire unstable structure above him was seconds away from collapsing. Susan took one shaking breath, then ran straight toward the danger again. The heat from the burning debris washed over Susan the moment she stepped deeper into the ruins. Flames curled up broken beams, sparks drifting like angry fireflies through the smoke-choked air. Her boots slipped on shattered bricks as she pushed forward, squinting through the haze to reach the half-buried figure. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, seconds slipping away before the entire structure collapsed for good. "Hey, can you hear me?" she yelled, her voice cracking from smoke and exhaustion. A faint groan answered her. She dropped to her knees beside him. He was young, too young, barely 20, his helmet cracked, his uniform soaked in dust and ash. A heavy wooden beam pressed across his legs. The fire above them hissed and snapped, small pieces of burning material raining down like embers of doom. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure. "I'm gonna get you out." He looked up at her, eyes glassy, barely conscious. I thought everybody left. I thought..." Susan gripped the beam with both hands, bracing her feet against the ground. Her muscles screamed in protest. Pain shot through her shoulders, her sides, her lower back. She pulled anyway. The beam didn't move. She gritted her teeth and heaved again, every muscle burning, her breath trembling with effort. "Come on," she muttered. "Come on, move!" With a desperate cry, she shifted her weight and pulled with everything she had left. The beam shifted, just an inch, but enough. She dug her hands deeper under the edge and pushed harder, her vision blurring, sweat mixing with soot on her skin. Finally, it lifted enough for her to drag him free. The structure above them groaned dangerously. A chilling crack echoed overhead. "Hold on to me," she shouted. She threw his arm over her shoulders and hauled him up, dragging him step by step across the uneven ground. The flames roared behind them, growing louder, hotter. The air vibrated with the sound of collapsing wood. "Please, please don't fall yet," she whispered, guiding him toward the shattered opening. A beam crashed down inches from her feet. Dust exploded into her lungs, making her cough violently, but she pushed through it. The soldier stumbled beside her, nearly falling. She tightened her grip. "You're not dying here," she said, her voice raw. "Not tonight." They made it halfway through the ruins when the world behind them gave one final thunderous crack. Susan didn't look back. She dragged him forward with every drop of strength left in her body as the building collapsed in a roar of stone and fire. Heat slammed into her back like a wave. Debris blasted outward. She shielded the soldier with her own body, crouching low and covering his head with her arms as the fiery dust cloud engulfed him. When it finally settled, everything was silent. So silent it felt unreal. She slowly stood, coughing, shaking, but still moving. She helped him toward the trench line, where medics rushed forward to take him. One of the medics grabbed her shoulders. "Susan, look at yourself. You can't keep doing this. You're barely standing." But the wounded soldier she'd saved reached out and gripped her hand weakly. You came back," he whispered. "You came back for me." Her throat tightened. "I come back for all of you," she said, barely above a breath. As they carried him away, Susan staggered, bracing herself against the wall. Her vision pulsed. Her body was past exhaustion, past pain, running only on something deeper, something fierce, something unstoppable. Around her, wounded men watched her with awe and disbelief. Some murmured her name. Some simply stared. A few whispered, "Angel," under their breath. But Susan didn't hear the praise. Because even now, even after everything, she heard something else. In the distance, a sound. Weak, faint, barely there. Another cry for help. Her breath hitched. Her legs trembled. Her whole body begged her to stay still. But she pushed away from the wall, standing taller than she should have been able to. Because someone out there was alive. Someone out there was waiting. And she still had strength for at least one more life. She took one shaking step forward and walked out into the darkness again. The battlefield was unrecognizable now, just shadows shifting through smoke, flames flickering against the ruined earth, and the distant thunder of artillery echoing like a giant's heartbeat. Susan moved through it with slow, deliberate steps, each one powered by pure will. Her legs trembled beneath her, her breath shallow, her vision blurry at the edges, but she refused to stop. She followed the faint sound again, a broken whisper, a cry barely louder than the wind. It drew her toward a crater near the far edge of the field, where the ground had been torn apart by constant shelling. When she reached the edge of the crater, she saw him, a lone soldier lying half buried in the mud, his uniform shredded, his face pale. He lifted his head weakly when he heard her steps. "No," he whispered, "this is too far. It's too dangerous. Go back." Susan slid down into the crater, ignoring the pain shooting through her body. "I'm not going anywhere without you," she said softly. He shook his head, tears gathering in his eyes. "I'm already done for. Don't risk your life." Susan reached him and placed a steady hand on his cheek. "You're alive. That's enough." She hooked her arms under his shoulders and pulled him upright. He cried out from the pain, but Susan whispered, "It's okay. I've got you. Just lean on me." The crater walls were steep, covered in loose mud and debris. Climbing out with both of them was nearly impossible. But she dug her boots in, pushed her body upward, and dragged him inch by inch toward the top. Her arms shook violently. Her lungs screamed for air. Her knees buckled again and again. But she didn't stop. Halfway up, another shell exploded in the distance, the shockwave knocking them sideways. Susan nearly fell, but she dug her fingers into the mud and refused to let the soldier slip. "You're not going anywhere," she said through clenched teeth. "Not tonight." With one final heave, she pulled both of them over the edge and collapsed into the dirt. For a moment, they lay there in silence, only their ragged breaths filling the air. Then Susan forced herself to stand, pulled the soldier up, and carried him toward the distant glow of the field hospital. The world around her seemed to fade. She barely heard the gunfire now, barely felt the cold. The only thing that kept her going was the steady rhythm of footsteps and the weight of the soldier leaning against her chest. When she reached the tent, medics rushed out with wide eyes. "Susan, oh my God, she's still going. How many did she save tonight? More than anyone thought possible." They took the soldier from her arms, and Susan staggered backward, finally letting her body stop fighting. She leaned against a table, breath heaving, eyes stinging with exhaustion. Everything hurt, everything blurred. A doctor approached her gently. "Susan, you saved dozens tonight. Dozens! I've never seen anything like it." Susan looked up slowly. Her voice was soft but unwavering. They needed help. That's all that mattered. One of the soldiers she saved earlier called out weakly from his cot. "You were the only one who didn't run. You walked into hell for us." Another whispered, "You didn't just carry us. You gave us hope." Susan's throat tightened, her eyes filled, but not from pain. From knowing the truth. She didn't do it for medals. She didn't do it for praise. She did it because every life out there mattered. And because, sometimes, heroes look like ordinary women who refuse to give up. As dawn finally broke over the battlefield, painting the sky shades of pink and gold, the soldiers watched her in silent reverence. The woman who walked through fire, through bullets, through collapsing ruins, just to bring them home. Susan Adams didn't just save lives. She changed them. Forever.